At my sister's wedding, I was told to just stand somewhere in the back because seats are reserved for real family. Even her dog had a place card. So I advanced over, grabbed the $7,500 check off the gift table, and declared, "Then let real family pay for your honeymoon." She chased me out, shouting, "You can't back off now." I, 32M, never thought my own sister's wedding would be the day I finally cut ties with my family. But sometimes life forces your hand in ways you never expect. The whole mess started 3 months ago when my sister announced her engagement. I'd been the one supporting her financially through college, helping with her rent when she was between jobs, and even co-signing her car loan when her credit was shot. Despite everything I'd done for her over the years, I could already sense something was different about how she was treating me since she got engaged to her fiancé, whose family apparently had money. The wedding planning process revealed exactly where I stood in her new world. Every conversation became about how his family was contributing this much, how they were paying for the venue, how they had connections for the catering. Meanwhile, when I offered to help with costs, she brushed me off, saying they had everything covered. I thought she was just being considerate, not wanting to burden me financially. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received my invitation. I opened it expecting the usual details, but something fell off immediately. There was no +1 mentioned, which was strange since I'd been dating someone seriously for over a year. When I called to ask about bringing my girlfriend, my sister got defensive, explaining that they had limited seating and had to make tough choices. She assured me that of course I'd have a proper seat, but they just couldn't accommodate extra guests. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I drove 3 hours to the venue with my carefully chosen gift, a check for $7,500 that represented a significant portion of my savings. I'd wanted to give her something meaningful for her new life, something that would help them get started. The amount represented months of careful budgeting and overtime work, but she was my only sister, and I believed families should support each other during major life events. I arrived at the venue 30 minutes before the ceremony, dressed in my best suit and carrying the envelope containing my gift. The venue was gorgeous, a historic mansion with manicured gardens and elegant decorations that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. I approached the guest book table where a wedding coordinator was helping people find their seats. When I gave her my name, she scanned the seating chart with a confused expression. She looked up at me apologetically and explained that she couldn't find my assigned seat. I waited while she double-checked the list, assuming there had been some oversight. After several minutes, she suggested I speak directly with my sister about the seating arrangement. I found my sister in the bridal suite, surrounded by bridesmaids and family members I barely recognized. She looked stunning in her dress, but the moment she saw me, her expression shifted to something between annoyance and embarrassment. When I mentioned the seating confusion, she pulled me aside and explained in a hushed voice that they'd had to make some last-minute adjustments to accommodate her fiancé's extended family, who had flown in unexpectedly. She told me not to worry about assigned seating, suggesting I could just find somewhere to stand in the back during the ceremony. She said it casually, as if this was a perfectly normal request for a bride to make to her brother. When I asked about the reception, she became more flustered, explaining that the dinner seating was extremely tight, but I could probably find a spot somewhere. The ceremony began, and I stood in the back corner near the entrance, watching my sister get married while surrounded by strangers who had better seats than her own brother. During the processional, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Her small dog, dressed in a tiny tuxedo, was being carried down the aisle by a flower girl, and I could clearly see a small place card attached to its collar indicating where the dog would sit during the reception. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her pet had received more consideration in the wedding planning than I had. I watched the entire ceremony from my position in the back, feeling increasingly invisible and questioning every sacrifice I'd made for my sister over the years. After the ceremony, guests moved to the cocktail hour while the wedding party took photos. I wandered around, making awkward small talk with people I didn't know, all of whom seemed to have assigned seats and belonged somewhere specific. Several people asked me how I knew the bride, and when I mentioned I was her brother, they looked surprised, as if they hadn't realized she had family beyond the relatives they'd already met. During cocktail hour, I overheard conversations that revealed just how differently my sister had been presenting her family situation to her new in-laws. Someone mentioned how wonderful it was that she'd been so independent, putting herself through college and building her career without family support. Another guest commented on how self-sufficient she'd always been, never having to rely on anyone else for financial help. Each comment felt like a knife twist, erasing years of my contributions to her success. I realized she'd been rewriting history to fit the narrative that would impress her new family, and I'd become an inconvenient reminder of a past she wanted to forget. The reception hall was beautifully decorated with elaborate centerpieces and elegant place settings. I watched as guests found their assigned seats, each table carefully planned and organized. I approached several tables, looking for my name or some indication of where I was supposed to sit, but found nothing. Finally, I asked one of the coordinators about my seating assignment. She consulted her charts and informed me that there hadn't been a specific seat reserved for me, but I was welcome to see if there were any empty chairs at tables that might be missing guests. The humiliation of having to scavenge for a seat at my own sister's wedding was overwhelming. I ended up at a table in the far corner with several empty chairs, apparently reserved for guests who hadn't shown up. The other people at the table were distant relatives of the groom who didn't know anyone and seemed as uncomfortable as I was. Meanwhile, I could see my sister's dog sitting at a prominent table near the head table, with its own special cushion and place setting. During dinner, I watched my sister laugh and celebrate with her new family, seeming completely unaware or unconcerned about how she'd treated me. The speeches began, and multiple people talked about how lucky the groom was to marry such an independent, self-reliant woman who'd achieved everything through her own hard work and determination. The final straw came when her new father-in-law gave a toast praising my sister for being such a strong, independent woman who'd never needed to depend on family money or support to build her life. He specifically mentioned how refreshing it was to see someone who'd made her own way in the world without relying on handouts or family wealth. I sat there listening to him praise my sister for qualities that were the complete opposite of reality, knowing that I'd been the one providing the financial support he was praising her for not needing. The applause that followed felt like mockery, and I realized that not only had my sister erased my contributions, but she'd actively constructed a false narrative that painted my help as something to be ashamed of. That's when I made my decision. I stood up quietly and walked toward the gift table, which was positioned near the entrance to the reception hall. The table was covered with elegantly wrapped presents and envelopes, representing thousands of dollars in wedding gifts from guests who'd been properly welcomed and seated. I found my envelope among the gifts, the one containing the $7,500 check that represented months of sacrifice and careful saving. As I picked it up, I felt a strange sense of clarity about what I needed to do. This wasn't just about the money. It was about recognizing my own worth and refusing to be treated as expendable. I walked back toward my sister's table, envelope in hand, with several guests noticing my movement. My sister was in the middle of laughing at something her new mother-in-law had said when I approached. The conversation at her table gradually died down as people realized something significant was about to happen. I told my sister that I'd been thinking about her father-in-law's beautiful speech about independent family members, and how much I appreciated finally understanding where I fit in her new life. I explained that since seats were apparently reserved for real family, and since I'd been told to just stand somewhere in the back while her dog had a place card, I figured the gift-giving should probably follow the same principle. I held up the envelope and announced that if real family was what mattered for seating arrangements, then real family should probably be the ones paying for her honeymoon. The table fell silent as people processed what was happening. My sister's expression shifted from confusion to horror as she realized what I was about to do. I told her I'd been happy to support her for years when she needed help, but since she'd decided to rewrite history and pretend that support never existed, it seemed appropriate to stop providing it going forward. Several nearby tables had stopped their conversations to watch what was unfolding. My sister jumped up from her chair and demanded that I put the envelope back, insisting that I couldn't do this to her on her wedding day. I reminded her that according to the seating arrangement and the speeches, she'd never needed family support anyway, so this shouldn't be a problem for someone so independent and self-reliant. She started following me as I walked toward the exit, her voice getting louder and more desperate. She shouted that I couldn't back out now, that I'd promised to help her, that this was her wedding day and I was being unreasonable. The irony of her suddenly claiming I was family when she needed something from me wasn't lost on anyone watching. Her new husband tried to intervene, suggesting we discuss this privately, but I was done with private discussions where I got talked into accepting treatment I didn't deserve. I told him that his wife was an incredibly independent woman who'd achieved everything without family help, so I was sure they'd figure out the honeymoon funding on their own. By this point, most of the reception had stopped to watch the drama unfold. I could see other family members looking uncomfortable, probably realizing how obviously I'd been excluded and marginalized. My sister was still following me, alternating between anger and pleading, trying to convince me that I was overreacting to a simple seating mix-up. I paused at the exit and turned back to address her one final time. I told her that the seating arrangement wasn't a mix-up. It was a clear statement about how she viewed my importance in her life. I explained that I'd spent years supporting her dreams and goals, only to be erased from her story when it became convenient to present herself as someone who'd never needed help. I wished her well in her marriage and told her I hoped her new family would be everything she needed, since she'd made it clear that her old family wasn't sufficient. Then I left, still carrying the envelope containing the check she'd expected to help fund her honeymoon. Update 1. The aftermath hit faster than I expected. Within hours of leaving the wedding, my phone started buzzing with calls and messages from family members who'd heard about what happened. Most of them were angry, accusing me of ruining my sister's special day and being petty over seating arrangements. A few understood my perspective, but they were in the minority. My sister called repeatedly that night and the next day, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. Her tone shifted from anger to desperation as she realized I was serious about withdrawing the money. She and her new husband had already booked their honeymoon based on expecting that gift, and suddenly they were facing a significant financial shortfall. The most telling message came 3 days after the wedding. She finally admitted that she'd deliberately downplayed my role in her life because her new in-laws had made comments about family members who needed financial help, and she didn't want them to think she came from a family that struggled financially. She'd been trying to impress them by appearing completely self-sufficient. Update 2. 2 weeks later, I received a long email from my sister attempting to explain her perspective and asking me to reconsider. She claimed that she'd been under enormous pressure from her new in-laws to present herself in a certain way, and she hadn't realized how hurtful her actions had been. She offered to pay me back for all the money I'd lent her over the years if I would just give her the wedding gift she'd been counting on. The offer revealed how little she understood about the real issue. This wasn't about the money I'd already given her, that had been given freely as family support. This was about being valued and respected as her brother, which apparently only mattered when she needed something from me. I decided not to cash the check at all. Instead, I deposited it into a savings account and decided to use the money for something that would benefit me for once. I'd spent so many years prioritizing her needs that I'd forgotten to invest in my own dreams and goals. Update 3. 6 months later, my sister and I still haven't spoken. She's made attempts to reach out through other family members, but I've made it clear that any relationship we might rebuild would need to start with her acknowledging how she treated me, not with her trying to get money she feels entitled to. The wedding incident forced me to examine all my family relationships and recognize patterns I'd been ignoring. I'd been so focused on being the supportive brother that I'd allowed myself to be taken for granted and treated as dispensable. The wedding was just the final, most obvious example of a dynamic that had been building for years. Some family members still think I overreacted, but others have privately admitted they were shocked by how obviously I'd been excluded from my own sister's wedding. A few cousins mentioned they'd noticed the empty seat situation and found it strange that I was standing in the back. The most important outcome hasn't been about the money or proving a point. It's been about learning to value myself enough to walk away from relationships where I'm not valued in return. The $7,500 I kept became the foundation for finally taking a vacation I'd been putting off for years, and later for starting the small business I'd always talked about but never prioritized. My sister got married and started her new life with her husband's family, who apparently provide all the support and approval she was looking for. I realized that trying to maintain a relationship with someone who's ashamed of your existence is exhausting and ultimately pointless. The hardest part was accepting that the sister I'd been supporting all those years had been replaced by someone who valued status and appearances more than family loyalty. But recognizing that truth allowed me to stop wasting emotional energy on someone who'd already decided I wasn't worth including in her new life. Looking back, I'm grateful the wedding happened exactly as it did. Without such a clear, public demonstration of how little I mattered to her. I might have continued the same pattern for years, always giving more than I received and accepting less than I deserved. Sometimes the most painful wake-up calls are exactly what you need to finally change your life.